So thank you for sticking with us. We're pulling into the home stretch with our closing reflections. And so please welcome two of my co-collaborators on this project, Charles Kang, who is postdoc in art history leadership here at the CMA and at Case Western Reserve University, and Professor Betsy Bolman, who is the Elsie B. Smith Professor of Art and Art History at Case Western Reserve University. We've heard, so many wonderful stories, anecdotes, ideas, theories, and complicated histories as we've sat together today. And so we wanted to just take a moment to sort of respond from our vantage as organizers, how this day came together, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we're planning next. And then there will be also a little bit of time for you all to ask any lingering questions or give any lingering comments you might have. And so I'm going to turn it over to Charles. Oh, yes.
Okay, great. So I actually would like to respond to today's proceedings by way of talking about something that occurred to me a few weeks ago, and I have a slide for it. So I wonder whether we can conjure that up. There we go. So a few weeks ago, I happened to be reading a wonderful short essay that our graduate fellow, Sam Truman, who greeted you just outside of this auditorium today, an essay that she had written for Betsy a few years ago for her monument class. And the paper touched upon many different topics, but at some point, Sam actually mentioned the Euclid Beach Park, a very thriving and very popular amusement park and entertainment complex that existed for more than the first half of the 20th century here in Cleveland. And one thing that she mentioned was very sort of striking to me, in that the park, for its, at least, for the 50 years of the first, 5 decades of the 20th century, had a very strict policy of segregation, especially in certain sites where mixing of the crowds was especially considered so-called dangerous. So that includes dance halls, swimming areas, and some other venues that were included within this park. And Sam wonderfully sort of mentioned how this park exists only in its sort of entrance gate that still stands basically northeast of here. And so, it sort of registered in my mind as something that I kind of wanted to go see. Here's a part that I have to sort of confess to you, that I'm a recent arrival to Cleveland. I moved here at the beginning of August. I don't drive yet, so my movement has been heavily limited to where I live, which is 5 minutes walk from here. So I always wanted to sort of see this site, see this gate, and really think about it. And then one day, I happened to be in the paintings conservation studio for a different reason, and I saw a painting that was just standing just to be treated. And our wonderful paintings conservator just mentioned, oh, that's the Euclid Beach Park. That's all he said. So I looked it up afterwards, and I realized that it is depicting precisely that park, one of the main attractions, this sort of merry-go-round that's on this very dramatic incline. And it was really interesting because, we've been talking a lot about memory, and in a way, if this memory of what happened at this park is something that exists on its own, it somehow got conjured up through this very particular means. And, I don't mean to say that Carl Gärtner, the great Cleveland artist, had anything specific to do with it, but for some reason that object, right, sort of taken out of its frame, sort of sitting on this sort of inclined, a kind of a trolley for ease of movement, in its own sort of nakedness, in its own exposedness, this object became something of a monument to me because it somehow just became associated with this particular story that I happened to read. So my main trade is actually curatorial, and it really made me think about, are objects that exist in museum galleries, are they also monuments? And what kind of memories do they contain? And what kind of memories do they, or can we sort of, approach them to conjure up? You know what I mean? And I think that possibility became very fascinating to me. So I was just really glad today that we got to talk about memory in all its manifestations and more. And I was especially touched by some of the stories that my panelists, Julie and Kathy and Julie, got to tell us. And I think going forward, I think I would be really interested in thinking more about this and how to then come up with very sort of actionable strategies as a curator, as a museum professional, to conjure up these memories, right? Like, and in a way where it doesn't condemn the object, but at least it offers an opportunity to talk, to discuss, and to continue remembering. Because that work of remembering is actually, I think, one of the key goals of this particular event and what we are trying to do. So that would be my response.
Thanks, Charles. Thank you. I will go next and just say that connected to what you said, Charles, I am constantly thinking about what we monumentalize within the museum and around the museum. And so for me, what came out today was a desire to know even more from the people in this audience, from the people who have been on this stage, from people who don't know about this event and don't know that there is a place or somebody who wants to hear what they have to say about this. So how do we consider, for me, this symposium was a way to think about not only community-informed, but community-led scholarship. What does it mean for a museum to invest in the people who, and a university, to invest in the people who work in it, as well as the people who dwell outside of it, as a part of what we do within it. And so, this is a little bit of a tangent, but in a recent series of interviews, we were interviewing candidates for some few things, and one of my questions was, when has an engagement with the community changed the way you do your work? And the response was often silence. When something actually shifted, where you didn't curate in the way that you thought you might, where you didn't include an object that you really wanted to include, where you showed something that, might have driven angst or other emotions. And so for me, thinking about today is a way of trying to create forums where the way that I describe Cleveland is a little bit like the men I like to date, a little bit withholding. They give you little bits and drabs, but then when you're in there, it's like, oh, that was worth it. And I feel like, to me, Cleveland really feels like that to me. And so my hope is that the conversations will continue, that the investments will continue, and that we can have an open space in which to not only conjure the memories, which are but to do the work, right, of wading into those memories and those memorials with both a reverent but also a critical lens. Yeah. So.
I don't have your gift at bringing the personal in such a delightfully humorous way, but I want to mention a couple things that people have said to me in the breaks. One was that it would have been nice to hear more about beauty. And of course, beauty is one of the things that matters most to me in the world. And I like to point out that the real world is more than just violence and poverty and warfare, right? The real world includes beauty and graciousness and kindness and love and all of those things too. And another comment was about the Cleveland Cultural Gardens, which was that as part of their charter, they're not allowed to have monuments that have to do with war. And I didn't know that. I thought that was really remarkable and impressive. And that there's a huge concentration there along MLK of monuments that are in a different category than the type that we've been discussing so much today. One of my thoughts about where I'd like to see this going in the future is I'd like to see more connections between the many subjects that we've discussed today that are all meaningful, but I'd also like to bring some more to the fore that we haven't talked about. We haven't talked about domestic violence. We haven't talked about the incredibly high number of women who have breast cancer in this country. We haven't talked about the AIDS crisis. You know, there are a lot of things that we haven't had time to talk about. We've been talking about lots of amazing things all day. I'm not trying to say that there's been any oversight. It's just there hasn't, I think, been time to explore all this. So moving forward, I'd like to see some of these, some connections being made, maybe from UH Hospital, from the clinic, from the health education campus to our discussions, and involving activists, also involving just more people who know about Cleveland. It's wonderful and humbling to be with so many people who know so much about this great city, and I am really excited to continue my journey of learning.
Wonderful, thank you. And to that end, I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes talking about what's next. So this isn't the end of this conversation. Please be on the lookout, because beginning in February of 22, we're going to start having more community conversations. We will start having programming that is around these topics, not only here and not only at CASE, but also among some of our partner institutions, some of the community activists that we've been working with, some of the artists that we've been working with. So please stay tuned. Next summer, there will be a temporary monument installed on the CMA's campus. And then again, we will have the December 2022 symposium. But in the meantime, please, from the welcome table, take those forms that ask you how you felt about today's symposium, and add, if you have a group or you are thinking about these things as well and you want to talk to us, you can put your contact information on those forms, and we will reach out to you and let you know as programs come up. You can also reach me at academicaffairs@clevelandart.org. So if you know of programs, ideas, artists that are thinking about not only monuments, but memory in Cleveland, please do reach out to us, because we are hoping to cross-promote, to have collaborative conversations, and that not all of these conversations have to happen inside of the institutions. We can also come to where you are.